The stars had always seemed so peaceful from the observation deck of the command station. Admiral Jake stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the distant lights that humans had dreamed about for thousands of years. Those dreams had brought them here, to the edges of known space, to worlds they had made their own. But dreams, he had learned, could become nightmares very quickly. The message had arrived 3 hours ago. At first, thought it was a mistake, some kind of error in the communication system. But then the images came through, and he understood that the universe had just changed forever. New Montana was burning. The colony world had been home to 12 million people. Farmers, teachers, doctors, children. They had built their lives on a planet with green hills and clear rivers, a place that reminded them of the Earth most of them had never seen. They had believed they were safe. They had believed wrong. They had come without warning. Their warships had appeared in orbit, blocking out the sun with their massive hulls. And then the bombardment had begun. Cities vanished in pillars of fire. Forests became ash. Rivers boiled away into steam. In 1 week, 12 million voices fell silent, and the broadcast their victory to the entire galaxy as a warning to all lesser species. Watched the recording again. He saw families running through burning streets. He saw children crying for parents who would never come. He saw the end of everything those people had worked to build. And somewhere deep inside him, something cold and hard began to form. The Galactic Assembly met on a station at the center of known space. It was a place of ancient power, where the great civilizations gathered to discuss matters of importance. Humanity had never been invited to speak there. They were too new, too weak, too primitive. But Ambassador Laura demanded an audience, and the rules said they could not refuse. She stood in the great chamber, surrounded by beings that towered over her. They were there, their silver skin gleaming under the artificial lights. The collective sent their representatives, insect-like creatures that clicked and buzzed as they communicated. The syndicate of watched from the shadows, their many eyes following every movement. Was a small woman with gray hair and steady hands. She had spent her entire life believing that diplomacy could solve any problem. She had believed that words could bridge any gap. Today, she would learn the truth. 12 million of my people are dead, she said, her voice carrying through the chamber. They were civilians, farmers, children. They posed no threat to anyone. We demand justice. We demand accountability. We demand that the answer for this crime. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then the laughter began. It started with the delegation, a cold sound that echoed off the ancient walls. Soon others joined in. They made their clicking sounds of amusement. Even the seemed to shake with something like humor. High Arbiter of the stepped forward. He was tall, nearly 8 feet, with silver skin and eyes like black ice. When he spoke, his voice was the sound of absolute certainty. Justice, he repeated, as if tasting a word he found distasteful. You speak of justice as if you were a real civilization. You are not. You are vermin that has crawled out of your little world and spread across space that does not belong to you. We did not commit a crime on New Montana. We performed pest control. The laughter grew louder, felt her face grow hot, but she did not look away. The Dominion hereby gives humanity 90 cycles to withdraw from all territories beyond your home system, continued. Return to your Earth. Stay there. Perhaps we will allow you to exist as a curiosity, a reminder of what happens to species that reach too far. If you do not comply, we will finish what we started. Every human world will burn. Every human life will end. This is not a threat. This is simply the natural order of things. He turned away from her, dismissing her as if she were an insect. Stood alone in that great chamber, surrounded by the laughter of beings who saw her people as nothing more than animals. She thought of New Montana. She thought of the children in those recordings. And she made herself a promise that she would never forget this moment. When she returned to Earth, she went directly to the underground command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. The United Terran Council was waiting for her, The leaders of every nation and colony gathered around a single table. She told them what had happened. She told them what they had said. And when she finished, the room was silent. Defense Secretary Cole was a large man with a soldier's posture and a diplomat's patience. He had waited a long time for this moment, though he had prayed it would never come. He pressed a button on the table, and a holographic display appeared in the air above them. 235 years ago, after our first contact with the ended with 3 of our ships destroyed, we began a secret project, he said. We called it Prometheus, after the god who gave fire to humanity. We knew that the galaxy was not the welcoming place we had hoped. We knew that someday someone would try to destroy us, and we decided that we would be ready. The display changed, showing images that made several council members gasp. Shipyards hidden in asteroid fields, factories buried inside moons, fleets upon fleets of warships waiting in the darkness between stars. We have been building in secret for over 2 centuries, Cole continued. Every generation has added to the project. Engineers who lived and died without ever seeing Earth. Workers who gave their lives to a cause they would never see completed, all of them working toward a single goal. He looked around the room at faces filled with shock, fear, and something else. Something like hope. The galaxy thinks we are weak. They think we will run. They think they can slaughter our people and we will simply accept it. His voice grew harder. They are wrong. The display showed a final number, glowing red in the darkness of the command center. 512,000 warships, fully armed, fully crewed, ready to launch. Admiral received the message that night. He read it 3 times to make sure he understood. Then he began to smile, and it was not a pleasant expression. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake. They had pushed humanity to the edge. They had laughed at human suffering. They had believed that humans would simply accept their fate. They were about to learn the truth. Humanity did not surrender. Humanity did not forget. And humanity, when pushed far enough, could become something that would make the stars themselves tremble with fear. The silence before the storm was ending, and the storm that was coming would change everything. The year was 2612, and humanity had just learned that it was not alone in the universe. The discovery should have been a moment of celebration. Instead, it became a lesson in survival. The exploration vessel Wanderer was the first human ship to encounter alien life. Captain Ben and his crew of 47 had been mapping a distant star system when they appeared. The insect-like beings did not send greetings. They did not ask questions. They simply opened fire. The Wanderer managed to transmit a final message before it was destroyed. The recording showed standing on his bridge, flames spreading behind him, calmly reporting everything he saw. His last words were simple. They're not interested in talking. Prepare yourselves. 2 more ships were destroyed trying to rescue survivors. There were no survivors. When news reached Earth, the world went into shock. For centuries, humanity had dreamed of meeting other intelligent life. They had imagined great friendships, shared knowledge and adventures among the stars. Instead, they had found monsters. Dr. Price was a young engineer working in a government research facility when the news broke. He stayed up all night watching the reports, seeing the faces of the dead scroll across his screen. And by morning, he had made a decision that would change the course of human history. He went to his superiors with a proposal. At first, they laughed at him. The idea was too big, too expensive, too impossible. But Price was persistent and the government was scared. Within a year, Project Prometheus had begun. The first challenge was simple but enormous. Where do you build 500,000 warships without anyone noticing? The galaxy was watching Earth, waiting to see what the primitive humans would do. Any obvious military buildup would be seen as a threat and crushed before it could begin. Price found his answer in the empty spaces of the solar system. Asteroids that no one cared about. Moons around gas giants that seemed worthless. regions of space so remote that no alien sensor would ever scan them. That was where humanity would build its secret. The first shipyard was constructed inside a hollowed-out asteroid in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. Workers traveled there in unmarked vessels, their identities erased from all records. They said goodbye to their families, knowing they might never see them again. Some of them wept. All of them went anyway. Maria Santos was 22 years old when she joined the project. She was a welder, the daughter of welders, and her hands knew metal like a painter knows canvas. She spent the next 40 years inside that asteroid, building ships that she was told would save humanity. She never saw Earth again. She died at her welding station, working on the hull of a destroyer. Her gave her a funeral in space, her body drifting among the stars she had given her life to protect. There were thousands like her, people who sacrificed everything for a future they would never see. The project grew over the decades. More shipyards were built, more workers were recruited. The secret spread to 17 different star systems, always hidden, always quiet. On the surface, humanity appeared peaceful and weak. Beneath the surface, they were becoming something else entirely. Dr. Price led the project for 60 years. He grew old watching his dream take shape. The ships they built were not copies of alien designs. They were something new. Human engineers studied every piece of alien technology they could find, and then they made it better. They used energy shields that could stop almost any weapon. Human scientists found a way to create focused beams that could punch through those shields like paper. They used organic ships that could repair themselves during battle. Human engineers developed weapons that could poison those organic systems, turning the ships against themselves. Every alien advantage was studied, understood, and countered. But the most important human advantage was something no alien could copy: determination. The workers in those hidden shipyards worked 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, year after year. They did not complain. They did not slow down. They knew what was at stake. Captain Torres was born on a shipyard station orbiting a frozen moon. She had never felt grass beneath her feet or breathed air that did not come from a machine. Her parents were both military officers, and her grandparents before them. 3 generations of her family had lived and died in the void, preparing for a war that had not yet come. Torres grew up running through the corridors of warships. She learned to pilot shuttles before she learned to ride a bicycle. By the time she was 18, she could command a destroyer. By 25, she was one of the youngest captains in the hidden fleet. Her ship was the Defiance, a dreadnought nearly 2 kilometers long. It carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon and enough crew to populate a town. Torres knew every inch of it, every system, every weapon. It was her home, and soon it would be her weapon. The crews of the hidden fleet were different from other humans. They had grown up knowing that their purpose was war. They trained constantly, running simulations and drills until combat became as natural as breathing. They studied alien tactics and learned to counter every strategy. They became soldiers in a way that no human generation before them had ever been. But they were not machines. They still laughed and loved and dreamed. They played games in their off hours and told stories about the Earth most of them had never seen. They formed families and raised children who would continue their work. They were human in every way that mattered. When news of New Montana reached the hidden fleet, Torres gathered her crew in the main hangar. Nearly 3,000 people stood before her, waiting to hear what she would say. "You all know what happened," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with anger. 12 million of our people are dead. They think they can do this without consequences. They think we are weak. She paused, looking out at the faces of men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment. "We have waited for over 200 years. We have built and trained and prepared while the galaxy laughed at us. Our parents sacrificed everything. Our grandparents gave their lives. They did it so that when this day came, we would be ready." She raised her fist. Today, we show the galaxy what humanity really is. Today, we stop hiding. Today, we make them understand that attacking our people has consequences they cannot imagine. The cheer that rose from the hangar was like thunder. It echoed through the corridors of the Defiance and spread to every ship in the fleet. After centuries of waiting, the time had finally come. Across 17 star systems, 512,000 warships began their final preparations. Crews ran to their stations. Weapons were armed. Engines were brought to full power. The largest military force in galactic history was waking up. And the galaxy, still laughing at the weak little humans, had no idea what was coming. Dr. Price, now over 100 years old and confined to a medical bed, watched the fleet status updates on his personal screen. He saw ship after ship report ready for launch. He saw the dream he had worked toward for his entire life finally becoming reality. He smiled, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Make them remember." Then the ships began to move. Supreme Commander X stood in the war room of the flagship, confident and relaxed. The humans had been given their warning. Soon they would retreat to their little planet and stay there like the vermin they were. The galaxy would return to its natural order, with the at the top and everyone else beneath them. His tactical officer suddenly made a strange sound. It was not quite a word, more like a gasp of confusion mixed with fear. "Supreme Commander," the officer said, his silver skin turning slightly pale. "Something is happening." X walked over to the sensor display with the lazy stride of someone who could not imagine anything that might worry him. He looked at the screen. Then he looked again. Then he felt something he had not experienced in over a century of warfare. Fear. Jump signatures were appearing across the galaxy. Not tens, not hundreds, not thousands, hundreds of thousands. They were coming from regions of space that every survey had marked as empty. They were coming from asteroid fields and distant moons and the cold darkness between stars. They were coming from everywhere. "That is impossible," X whispered. The first human fleet emerged from jump space in the system. Was a fortress world, protected by 8,000 warships and defense platforms that had never been breached. It was considered the most secure military installation in the Dominion. The human fleet numbered 92,000 vessels. Admiral Jake stood on the bridge of the Constellation, the flagship of the combined human fleet. Around him, officers worked their stations with calm efficiency. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. Now it was time to show the galaxy what that training had created. "Open a channel," said, "all frequencies." When his face appeared on screens across the system, the defenders saw something that confused them. The human admiral was not screaming with rage. He was not making threats. He was simply standing there, as calm as a man discussing the weather. "This is Admiral Jake of the United Terran Fleet," he said. "You had your chance for peace. You chose extinction. We are simply honoring your choice." The channel closed. The human fleet began to move. On the flagship Guardian of Fleet Commander Axe watched the human vessels approach. He had fought dozens of wars against various species. He knew how battles were supposed to look. This did not look like any battle he had ever seen. The human ships moved together in a way that seemed impossible. Thousands of vessels acting as one, their formations shifting and changing with perfect timing. No species could coordinate that many ships that precisely. It required a level of communication and training that should not exist. "All ships engage the enemy," Axe ordered. "Focus fire on their lead vessels." The fleet opened fire. Beams of destructive energy lanced across space toward the human ships. This was the moment when any normal enemy would begin to suffer losses. Their shields would fail. Their ships would explode. The natural order would be restored. The human shields held. Axe stared at his display in disbelief. Weapons were the most powerful in the galaxy. Their technology was the most advanced. No other species had ever been able to block their attacks so completely. Then the humans returned fire. Lieutenant Commander Chris Palmer stood at the tactical station aboard the carrier Relentless. His job was to coordinate strike craft deployments, but for this first engagement, he simply watched. Everyone watched. They needed to see if 200 years of preparation had been enough. The human weapons were something new. They did not simply hit the shields. They went through them. The focused beams that Dr. Price's engineers had developed did exactly what they were designed to do. They made the impenetrable shields penetrate. The first destroyer exploded, then another, then a dozen more. The silver ships which had seemed so invincible began to die. Fleet Commander Axe screamed orders at his officers trying to organize a response, but there was no response that could help. The human fleet was not just bigger than his, it was better. Their ships were faster, their weapons were stronger, their crews were more skilled. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, 8,000 warships had been reduced to drifting wreckage. Human losses were minimal. A few dozen ships damaged, a handful destroyed, nothing that mattered against the size of their force. Palmer watched the final vessel go dark and felt a strange mixture of emotions. Pride, certainly. They had proven themselves, but also something like sadness. This was not what humanity had wanted. They had wanted to explore, to discover, to make friends. Instead, they had been forced to become warriors. "Send a message to the surface," Admiral ordered. "The military installations are to surrender immediately. Civilian populations will not be harmed. Anyone who resists will be destroyed." The ground commander refused to surrender. He lasted 6 hours before his bunker was reduced to molten slag. Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread at the speed of fear. The collective, which had been mobilizing its forces to support suddenly stopped. The syndicate which had been planning to raid undefended human colonies, changed their plans entirely. Every species that had laughed at humanity went very quiet. On Prime, the Supreme Commander X received the reports with growing horror. Had fallen. The fortress that had never been breached was now occupied by humans, and the ships that had taken it were just one part of their fleet. "How many ships do they have?" X demanded. His intelligence officer's voice trembled as he answered. "Based on sensor data from multiple systems, we estimate their total force at approximately 500,000 vessels." X felt the room spin around him. That was not possible. That was more than the combined fleets of every major power in the galaxy. That was more ships than had ever been assembled in the history of known civilization. "Where did they come from?" he whispered. No one could answer. The humans had hidden their preparations so well that not a single alien intelligence service had detected them. For over 200 years, while the galaxy laughed at the primitive species from Earth, those primitives had been building the largest military force ever created. On the constellation, received reports from every front. Human fleets were emerging simultaneously in 18 different sectors. They were not attacking randomly. Each fleet had specific targets, specific objectives, specific orders. The entire operation had been planned down to the smallest detail. Captain Torres and the Defiance led the assault on a supply station. Her crew moved through the battle like artists, every maneuver precise, every shot finding its target. When the station fell, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Then she looked out at the stars and thought about all the battles still to come. This was just the beginning. They would not surrender easily. The other powers would have to be dealt with. The galaxy would resist. But humanity was ready. They had been ready for a very long time. His voice came over the fleet-wide channel, calm and confident. "All units, Phase 1 complete. Proceed to Phase 2 targets. Remember your training. Remember New Montana. And remember that the galaxy is watching." The galaxy was indeed watching, and what it saw made it tremble. 500,000 warships, moving with perfect coordination, unstoppable and unafraid. Humanity had awakened, and nothing in the universe would ever be the same. The collective had survived for 10,000 years by knowing when to fight and when to submit. They had crushed countless species beneath their claws, but they had also bent the knee to greater powers when necessary. Survival was more important than pride. Hive Master called an emergency council when the reports from arrived. The clicking and buzzing of frightened filled the chamber as they debated what to do. Some demanded war, others demanded flight, but was old and wise, and he saw the truth that others tried to ignore. "We cannot fight them," he said, his mandibles clicking with each word. "Look at the numbers. Look at what they did to the fortress. If we oppose them, we will die, all of us." "Then we flee," one of the younger hive leaders suggested. "Where?" asked. "They have ships everywhere. They have been watching us, planning for this moment. There is nowhere in the galaxy where we could hide from them." The chamber fell silent as the truth settled over them like a cold fog. "We have one choice," continued. "We must ask for peace. We must admit that we were wrong, and we must hope that humans are more merciful than we would have been in their place." The diplomatic vessel arrived at the edge of human-controlled space carrying messages of surrender. Admiral Reeves, commanding the 7th Fleet, received them with a face carved from stone. She had lost family on New Montana. Her cousin and his children had lived there. Their names were among the 12 million dead. Every time she looked at the delegation, she thought about those names. But Admiral Reeves was a professional. She followed her orders. "The United Terran government accepts your surrender," she said. Her voice was cold but controlled. "These are our terms. Your military forces will be disbanded completely. All warships will be dismantled. All weapons platforms will be destroyed. Your worlds will accept human observers who will ensure compliance." The ambassador trembled visibly. These terms, they would leave us defenseless. "Yes," Reeves agreed. "They would. Consider it a lesson in how it feels." They signed the surrender documents that same day. Across their territory, ancient warships that had conquered 100 worlds were powered down and towed to scrapyards. A species that had been masters of war for 10 became peaceful in the span of a few weeks. They had no other choice. The syndicate chose a different path. They decided to run. They were merchants and slavers, not warriors. They had grown rich by trading and suffering, buying and selling beings of all species as property. Millions of humans had passed through their markets over the centuries, sold to lives of misery on alien worlds. When the human fleet appeared, they loaded their ships with everything valuable and fled toward the galactic rim. Vice Admiral Santos caught them 2 days later. His 4th Fleet surrounded the convoy in empty space, far from any help. The merchant lords sent desperate messages, offering bribes of unimaginable wealth. They offered information about other species. They offered anything the humans wanted. Santos remembered visiting a rescued human slave when he was a young officer. The woman had been captured as a child and spent 40 years in markets. She could barely speak anymore. She flinched at every sound, every movement. Her eyes held a darkness that never went away. He opened a channel to the fleet. "You have 2 options," he said. "Return to your territory and face justice for your crimes, or die here in the dark, forgotten by everyone." The syndicate master tried to negotiate. "Surely we can reach some arrangement. We are businessmen. Everything has a price." "You sold children," Santos replied. "You sold mothers and fathers. You built an empire on human suffering, and now you want to make a deal." He paused. "Turn your ships around, face your judgment, or I will reduce every vessel in your fleet to atoms. You have 1 hour to decide." Most of the fleet chose to return. The few ships that tried to run did not get far. The trials would come later. For now they were taken prisoner, their wealth seized, their empire dissolved. The slaves they had held were freed. Many of them were human. Many of them had been born in chains, knowing no other life. They wept when they learned they were finally free. But they refused to surrender. Supreme Commander X his remaining forces at Prime, the of the Dominion, every surviving warship, every armed station, every weapon that could fire was brought to defend the. It was the largest concentration of military power in history. The humans are soft, X told his commanders. They have won easily so far, but they have not faced true resistance. When they see how many of them will die to take Prime, they will negotiate. They will accept something less than total victory. It is in their nature. He believed this because he did not understand humans. He saw their mercy to thee and thee as weakness. He thought that if the price became too high, they would back down. He was completely wrong. Admiral arrived at Prime with 300,000 warships. They had gathered 40,000 defenders. It was not enough. It was not close to enough. Give them one chance to surrender, ordered. The message was sent. Supreme Commander X responded by executing the human prisoners his forces still held and broadcasting the images across all frequencies. Watched the executions in silence. When they ended, he turned to his officers with an expression that made several of them look away. No surrender will be accepted from this point forward, he said. All military personnel are to be considered hostile, engage and destroy. The Battle of Prime lasted 3 days. They fought with everything they had. Their ships crashed into human vessels in suicide attacks. Their soldiers fought to the last warrior on stations and outposts. They died cursing humanity, died believing they were the superior species, died refusing to accept that the galaxy had changed. Captain Torres led the Defiance through the heart of the formation. Her ship took hit after hit, but the damage control teams kept her fighting. She watched friends die around her. She saw ships she had known her whole life explode in the darkness. But she did not stop. None of them stopped. On the 3rd day, the last warship went silent. Supreme Commander X was captured alive, found hiding in a bunker beneath the capital city. He was brought before Admiral in chains, his silver skin covered in dust and blood. You think you have won, X said, but you have only made the galaxy fear you. Fear turns to hate, hate turns to resistance. In time, others will rise against you. Looked at him for a long moment. Perhaps, he said, but they will have to live with what you started. They will have to remember New Montana, and they will have to understand that we did not want this. You forced us to become what we are. Remember that when you face your judgment. The tribunal was held on the very station where Ambassador had been laughed out of the Galactic Assembly. She stood before the court, no longer a dismissed diplomat but the voice of human justice. She read the charges against X. The list included genocide, war crimes, crimes against sentient beings, and 200 other offenses documented in careful detail. The reading took 4 hours. When it was done, X was led away to await his sentence. He would never leave that station alive. The galaxy watched all of this. They watched the submit. They watched the drag to justice. They watched the mighty reduced to a conquered people. And they wondered what humanity would do next. The galaxy held its breath. The great powers had fallen. The old order had been swept away in a storm of fire and metal. Now everyone waited to see what humanity would build in its place. History had shown what conquerors did. They took territory. They demanded tribute. They enslaved the defeated and made them serve. They had done this for thousands of years. They had done the same. It was the way of things, the natural order of the galaxy. Humanity did something different. The first ships to arrive at conquered worlds after the war were not warships. They were relief vessels, carrying food and medicine and engineers. They came to rebuild what had been destroyed, not to take what remained. Admiral Jake stood on the observation deck of the Constellation for the last time. The war was over. His part was done. Below him, the blue-green jewel of Earth turned slowly in the darkness, beautiful and peaceful. "You could stay," said Captain Torres. She had come to see him off. "The fleet needs you. The government needs you." Shook his head. "The fleet needs leaders who can build peace, not warriors who only know war. You understand that better than I do." Torres nodded slowly. She had spent the last month overseeing reconstruction efforts in space. She had seen children who had never known anything but conflict learning to play in safe streets. She had seen hospitals rising from the ruins of military bases. She had begun to believe that victory could mean more than just defeating an enemy. "What will you do?" she asked. "There is a school on the shores of Lake Superior," said. "They need a history teacher, someone who can explain to children why their grandparents had to fight and why their generation might not have to." Torres smiled. The great admiral teaching children about the past. "Someone needs to," he said. "Otherwise, we might forget. And if we forget, we might become exactly what we fought against." He saluted her one final time, then walked away toward the shuttle that would take him home. Torres was promoted to Rear Admiral and given command of the peacekeeping forces in former territory. It was the hardest job of her life, and also the most rewarding. The who survived the war were not the proud, cruel beings who had laughed at humanity in the Galactic Assembly. They were broken, confused, unable to understand how their world had changed so completely. Many of them expected to be enslaved or exterminated. That was what they would have done. Instead, Torres and her teams worked to rebuild their cities. Human engineers helped restore power systems and water supplies. Human doctors treated wounded alongside human patients. Human teachers opened schools where children could learn about a galaxy that was changing. It was not easy. There were who could not accept the new order, who attacked human peacekeepers and tried to restart the war. Torres dealt with them firmly but not cruelly. She understood that hatred took time to die, and that some wounds needed generations to heal. But slowly, things began to change. Young who had never known the old empire began to see humans as something other than enemies. Trade routes opened. Cultural exchanges began. A new generation started to build bridges that their parents could never have imagined. Dr. Price, the architect of humanity's secret fleet, lived long enough to see the peace he had made possible. He was over 100 years old now, confined to a medical facility on Earth, his body failing but his mind still sharp. Reporters came to interview him constantly. They wanted to know about Project Prometheus. They wanted to understand how humanity had kept such an enormous secret for so long. They wanted him to express pride in what he had created. He gave one final interview, broadcast across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched as the old man spoke from his hospital bed, his voice weak but clear. "You ask if I am proud," he said. "That is the wrong question. I am glad that we survived. I am grateful that my work helped protect my people. But proud? No." The interviewer seemed confused. "But you saved humanity. You built the fleet that won the war." Price shook his head slowly. "We did not want to become this. When I was a young man, humanity dreamed of the stars. We imagined meeting other intelligent beings, learning from them, sharing our knowledge. We wanted to explore, to discover, to make friends." He paused, his old eyes looking at something the cameras could not see. "But the galaxy would not let us. When we reached out in friendship, we were attacked. When we asked for peace, we were laughed at. When we begged for mercy, we were slaughtered. So we became what we had to become. Not conquerors, not warriors by choice, but survivors. We did what was necessary to exist." His voice grew stronger for a moment. "And now, perhaps, we can finally become what we always wanted to be. Not the masters of the galaxy, but its teachers. Not its rulers, but its healers. We have shown that we can destroy. Now we must show that we can build." He died 3 days later, peacefully, in his sleep. His funeral was attended by representatives of every species in the galaxy. The Galactic Assembly reconvened on the same station where Ambassador had once been humiliated. But now, Humans sat at its head. The chamber that had echoed with laughter at human suffering now fell silent when humans spoke. Laura, once a dismissed diplomat, now served as High Chancellor of the new Galactic Council. She stood before the assembled representatives of 100 species and spoke words that would be remembered for. "We remember what you did," she said. "We remember New Montana. We remember the 12 million dead. We remember being called vermin and told to accept our extinction." The chamber was utterly silent. Every being present could feel the weight of history pressing down on them. But we also remember what we learned in our darkest hour. We learned that strength without wisdom leads only to destruction. We learned that vengeance, no matter how justified, leaves nothing but ashes. She looked around at faces that had once looked at her with contempt. Now they watched her with something like hope. The old galaxy was built on fear. The strong crushed the weak. The powerful took what they wanted. Species rose and fell, and nothing ever truly changed. Her voice grew stronger. "That galaxy is dead. We killed it because we had no choice. But now we must build something new, something better. A galaxy where species are judged not by their power but by their wisdom, where the weak are protected, not exploited, where differences are celebrated, not destroyed." She raised her hand, and behind her, a symbol appeared on the great screen. It was the emblem of the Terran Protectorate, a circle containing every intelligent species in the galaxy, all equal, all protected. "We do not ask you to forget what happened. We do not ask you to pretend that the past did not exist, but we ask you to believe that the future can be different. We ask you to help us build that future together." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the chamber. The galaxy watched in terror as humanity unleashed its wrath. That was necessary. But now the galaxy can watch something far more dangerous than war. It can watch us offer something that our enemies never offered us. She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had seen the worst of the universe and still believed in the best. "Hope." The chamber erupted in applause. Representatives of species that had fought against humanity stood and cheered. Former enemies wept openly. Something had shifted in the galaxy, something profound and irreversible. In a small house on the shores of Lake Superior, Admiral watched the broadcast with his students gathered around him. They were young, most of them born after the war, innocent of the horrors their grandparents had faced. One of them, a girl with curious eyes, looked up at him. "Is it true?" she asked. "Can people really change like that?" Thought about all the battles he had fought. He thought about the friends he had lost. He thought about the enemies who had become allies and the galaxy that was slowly, painfully, learning to be better. "I do not know," he said honestly, "but I believe it is worth trying. The alternative is a galaxy that never stops fighting, never stops suffering, never stops being afraid, and we have seen enough of that." He looked out at the lake, at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "We have proven that we can destroy. Now we must prove that we can build. That is the real test. That is what will determine whether our victory meant anything at all." The stars shone down on a galaxy that was changing. It would take centuries for the old wounds to heal completely. There would be setbacks and failures and moments of doubt, but something had begun that could not be stopped. Humanity had shown the galaxy what it could become when pushed to the limit. Now it was showing the galaxy something far more important. What it could become when it chose hope over fear. And the galaxy, trembling, began to hope as well.